Welcome to the Spoiler Alert podcast. And today we have a special guest, Juhas, and we are going to be reviewing Alfred Hitchcock's 1954 Rear Window. But let the people know where to find you.
Where to find me? Well, thanks for having me on, first of all, because we go way back to college. I don't think we've talked, besides you reaching out to me about like social media stuff, I don't think we've connected in a long time. I haven't talked to a lot of people from college, which is on me. But yeah, you can follow me on my social medias are TikTok at Christinessnaps, and then same thing on Instagram, but there's 2 S's on Snaps because that username was taken. And then I think my Snapchat is snaps_Christine. I'd have to check, but that's really, and my YouTube is Christinessnaps. It's really the same all over the place. But yeah, I just post comedy videos, little skits and bits. Yeah, I have a short film coming out, or by the time this comes out, it'll probably be out. So I have a short film on my YouTube channel that I just went to New Orleans to make. So you can check that out.
Nice.
That's pretty much it. Yeah.
Cool. But yeah, so let's get into Rear Window. The movie opens on, I believe it's actually the morning, where it's like during a heat wave. I'm assuming it's in New York or some sort of metropolitan area. Like, seems like an East Coast city. You know, everyone's pretty compact, and my background is actually like an example of it. And right away, before I forget, one of my favorite things about this movie, and I didn't notice the first time I watched it, but like a few years ago, but the entire score, the music, is all just natural. So it's all the neighbor playing the piano, or a couple putting in a record, or the sounds of the street. It's all, there is no score. It's all natural. It's all natural music, which
how come I didn't know that?
It's kind of, I didn't figure it out the first time.
Yeah, now that I think about it, that does make sense. I was reading something about like at the I don't know if it's the beginning, but you hear like a commercial playing like on the radio, like you hear it. What's that called? I forgot the term. It's like dialectic noise, like noise that was made on set by the people.
I know what you're talking about, but I always kind of simplified it to where it's natural and unnatural sound. There are more specific.
Yeah.
I think there is more specific phraseology that I think you're saying, because there's basically like if you have like a musical cue and there's obviously not an orchestra anywhere near, that's what the unnatural sound is.
Gotcha.
But then, like you said, like the radio and everything else would be natural. So that was just one of my favorite things. And the first shot, I think it's one take or damn near, but it gives you the entire lay of the land, and the entire movie is also shot through just inside that room, inside that apartment.
Yeah.
Which is super impressive. Whenever any of the other characters walk to do something, you don't follow them.
I think when you watch that movie all the way through once, and obviously you haven't seen it, when you get to the end and you're like, wow, we never left the apartment. Like when I first saw it the first time, I was definitely like impressed that he could hold my attention. He told a whole story and like we didn't even leave. Like that was very cool. And I felt like I felt like I saw so much, even though we never left as like the audience.
Yeah, and but it's a really tight neighborhood. We get another thing I like that we've kind of been talking about is, even if he doesn't know their name or whatever else, it always seems like he has a relationship with his neighbors, where he looks at one neighbor who he calls her Miss Torso. She probably has a real name in real life. If it were a thing, if this movie were real life, she'd have a real name. But he calls her Miss Torso because she's like a ballerina who practices, and he gets all googly-eyed over her. And then over here, is a couple that sleeps outside, I believe. Or no, maybe that's them, because that looks like a bed. I don't know.
It's one of them.
I think it's this one. They sleep outside and they have a dog that they pulley down on a thing and let the dog play all day and calm. It actually seems like a pretty cool system. And then you don't have to actually walk your dog.
Yeah.
And then there's another couple right here who the wife is like has some sort of injury or something that to where she's bedbound and she's needing of care. And then just a pretty like unassuming seeming husband. And then around this way we have like a young married couple too. And all the relationships kind of play a role with Jeff because Jeff's this guy played by James Stewart, who had just broken his leg. And I actually forgot how he broke his leg. Was it in a car accident? Do you remember?
It was, I don't know. I read two versions. That one, it was he was filming a race and there was a car accident. Something like that. Because he's a photographer. It's something with him working.
Okay, that makes more sense because I remember the first time I'd watched the movie and I didn't quite pick up on it this time that one of the first shots is we get like a shot of the photos on his mantle or whatever, and there's a shot of a race car like breaking apart. And I was the first time I watched the movie, I'd thought like, oh, is he a race car driver and he broke his leg in that accident? And then I didn't really think about it again. But yeah, this time I got confused. But that would make a lot of sense if he was actually the one taking the picture and he decided, yeah, fuck it, I'm gonna keep that picture. Why not?
Yeah, that's kind of like not sadistic, but like keep the thing that reminds me of the imagery. And we're like, oh, whatever.
Hey, you broke your leg for it. You may as well, Yeah, it was a good shot.
Trophy, I guess.
But yeah, so he's got a broken leg. He's bedbound. We meet his physical therapist, Stella. She's pretty funny. They talk a lot about like, oh, why aren't you married, Jeff, and stuff like that. And he's got a girlfriend, Lisa, who we see in a few scenes. Basically, Stella's, they give out the big like kind of should people get married, when when do you commit, like kind of argument. And you see it also playing out in the neighborhood because the newlyweds seem super happy, and then at the end they're not actually that happy. They get in a fight like anyone else. And then you have a really lonely woman who like sets the table for herself and drinks wine by herself. And then you have, I would say, a pretty happy couple that I don't think have kids with the dog, because like we don't really see kids running around. And then you have that couple.
I think they sleep on the, what's that called, balcony, because it's supposed to be during a heat wave, which explains like why everyone's windows and stuff are open, is what I read.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I was like, why do they sleep out there? But then I was like, it's supposed to be hot. Like they can't take the heat.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And I love how like directors use weather to their advantage. And a lot of this movie with the heat wave reminded me of like Do the Right Thing, which is a totally different movie. But the idea is that basically like tempers and things like that are kind of like risen on a hot day, and it kind of just sets the tone where, I don't know, kind of anything could happen, I suppose.
When I watched the movie, for some reason, I don't know. I never picked up until I started doing research to do this podcast. I never really picked up on all of the marriage talk. I don't know if it's because it's like at the beginning of the movie, him and his therapist kind of talk about it, and like I just glossed over me because when I saw the movie for the first time when I was young, like with my mom. She's really into old movies, so I've seen it. Like whenever she watches it, I somehow end up sitting down with her and watching. So I'm like, I've seen it multiple times, but I never like really like clung on to all the romance, the marriage talk. But all the research that I was doing was just saying how like everyone else's relationships are really a reflection of, you know, the main two characters, Jeff and Lisa. Cause it's like, you could be this married couple if you guys would get married. Like you know, are you going to fight? Like this couple doesn't have any kids, you know, it gives them like a perspective of what their life could be if they went to like the next stage of whatever their relationship is. But I never like caught on to all like the relationship talk when I watched it the first couple times, probably because I was just young. But that is interesting. It really is, because it's like whatever, it's kind of like that rule about like pointing your finger. When you point at somebody else, there's like three pointing back. Like when he's looking at everyone else's like what they're doing, it's really a reflection of like what he's also doing or not doing, like with Lisa, and what they could have. So I mean, it went over my head the first couple times, but Alfred Hitchcock is a genius. I love him as a director, and
Yeah.
I mean, it went over my head, but I see exactly where he was going with it now.
And that's honestly one of my favorite things about like doing the podcast, because like for all of these, I take at least like one page of good notes. And
Yeah.
when you're actually sitting down by a movie and literally taking notes, like you kind of realize just how much thought went into everything. You could probably learn a lot more from just like writing down like really good notes after while you watch a movie that's like, you know, a classic movie or whatever.
Yeah, I think you and I went like, because we went to school for it. Like, I really don't watch too many movies now with my mind off. I feel like nowadays, every single thing I watch, I'm like, that's good set design. Like, I love this like crane shot they did. And my friends watch a lot more movies than I do, but I'm like, well, that's clearly a crane shot. And like, they did this behind the scenes to get that. And they're like, oh, we're not
Yeah.
paying attention for that. And I was like, oh, well, my brain is thinking like, you know, what is the production? Like, how much did that cost? You know, like stuff like that.
Yeah. You definitely look at things different. And, you know, and then when you talk it through, like when you talk for a long time with people about like a movie that you both like, or we have some movies that we give bad reviews of, but usually it's kind of a thing though. Like by the end of every single, almost every video, we usually end up liking the movie more, even if we don't really like the movie that much. We like the movie more after we talk about it enough, because we at least see like the reasons for the flaws. And we're like,
you can appreciate it for what it is. Like you can clearly see like, well, the budget didn't go to this, but the budget went to this. Like you could tell.
Yeah. Or like, or, you know, if there was just like one big problem that just kind of hamstrung the movie from the beginning and caused other problems, like, you know, you could kind of be like, well, it all just comes down to one big problem. So but yeah, so Jeff really doesn't want to be married. He's very non-committal. Although Lisa seems great, like but the big difference between the two seems to be that he's like a war veteran who is also like a photojournalist during the war, and he got injured. He, you know, experienced war, so he doesn't really need any more excitement the rest of his life. He just kind of wants to just be where he is. And Lisa's super adventurous and you know, wants to be like get into like the fashion world and things like that, and you know, do very like adventurous
surface level things. Like he's like I've lived a life, and she's like, let's do all this stuff that people say they always want to do, and he's like, I'm good. I know I'm good. Like pretty good.
She's like, you know, I want to travel. I want to do this like artistic thing where I want to like design dresses and stuff, and just stuff that, you know, someone that is in Jeff's position, he might be like, well, if you're with me, I'd probably be holding you back, or B,
Yeah.
like, you know, or B, like, I just don't want to be around that much excitement anyway.
Mhm.
So that's kind of their dynamic, and it sort of evolves throughout the movie. Yeah, so I mentioned the neighbor that has dinner by herself.
They call her like
Oh,
Miss Lonely Hearts or something.
yeah, they call her Miss Lonely Heart. So
Miss
a lot
Lonely
of the
Hearts.
names too will be like basically the nicknames that he gives to them. So yeah, Miss Lonely
Yeah.
Heart and Miss Torso, and then piano players. I don't think he gives a nickname to, but which the piano player is he doesn't have too much of a character arc other than that he's the score for the movie. So
I
he kind of
honestly
plays a big role.
Yeah, I honestly forgot about his character. Like, I always forget about the pianist and the married couple because they're like off to the side a little bit. Those are
Yeah.
the two like sets of characters I always can't recall. But then I was like, yeah, it makes sense because that's where the music comes from. But he literally just sits at the piano the whole time. And I think they have like one get together that one night. And he's playing with other musicians. But I'm like, yeah, he doesn't like move. Like, so I'm always like, yeah, he's just there.
Yeah, and I think Hitchcock too makes a cameo. Uh he makes a cameo as, I'm assuming, like his music director or whatever. Uh
Yeah,
some type of thing like that where he's playing
yeah.
music for him.
Because he does
Um
that in all his movies. But I thought Hitchcock's cameo in Rear Window was him walking in the street, like to the left and the back. I
no,
never knew that he was. I didn't never knew he was in that apartment until I watched it again, and I was like, oh, I thought I don't know. I just got confused of where he was. I love his cameos. I love that.
yeah, they're pretty solid cameos. And just an example to really like hammer home kind of Jeff and Lisa's relationship at the beginning of the movie is they literally have Lobster out and the neighbors are playing music and he's with Lisa and he's still not happy and he's still like distant from her. You know what I mean? Like emotionally distant. And I think that's like the root of the movie is like emotional distance with people because you know you have all your neighbors and it's almost not like we end up talking about like social media and shit like that a lot, but it's almost like social media where you see everyone at the surface level. This person's with
Hmm.
this person's single, this person plays the piano, you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
you don't really get in to like to know them. And I
Hmm.
think that's kind of what his and Lisa's relationship is too. Like at the surface, everything's fine, but they don't. He's not really putting forth an effort to go to like know her. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Because like
probably vice
even
versa.
of all the people, there's like a physical distance. So it's like, yeah, you wouldn't have an emotional connection to them. But even with like the person who's closest physically to him, Lisa, he still doesn't have an emotional connection, which is like
Exactly.
such an underlying, like it's what you just said. It's like such an underlying, like mind blown sort of thing where you're like, yeah, that is 100% true. And it's such a commentary on like everyone else, but also even more on himself and that his own like life. It's crazy.
Yeah. And then that night after the dinner, he's like sleeping by the window or whatever, and he wakes up in the middle of the night and it's raining. And
Hmm.
oh, he I think he wakes up to a scream actually, or
Yeah.
he wakes up to a scream, but the blinds are closed and doesn't see anything else happen. But and then I think he dozes off again and then wakes up and sees his neighbor, the one right there ish, uh, taking like three or more trips, at least three trips with a big suitcase, just like off like into the city and coming back. And it's just it's pretty suspicious because his wife was like a caretaker, like needed care. I forgot what it was, like if she had like a cast on her foot or what, but
Yeah.
or if she was just sick, but they had been kind of arguing anyway and he had seen that, but now he doesn't see her. And as someone that needs like 24-hour attention, it's kind of crazy that like she would just go like disappear like that or like, you know, just be
Yeah.
closed in like that.
Does he make I can't remember. Does he make the trips at the same night?
Yeah, because okay, I
That's
don't
so weird.
I don't actually know when okay. I don't know when he had time to dig the garden, because I don't know if you remember
Yeah.
that part. But yeah, so the same night he had like trips of like with the suitcases, all the trips with like the smaller suitcase.
Mm-hmm.
And then at some point he also buried parts um in the garden, but I don't know when he could have done that.
Yeah. Isn't what
Without
he buried? I Googled what did he bury in the garden so many times because there's so many theories of what it was. And some people said it was like parts of her, but other people said it was like whatever he killed her with. Because where does that stuff go? Like I couldn't get an answer because you don't see it because
well
we never see it.
he did, I think, and this is, it's called spoiler alert, so at any time like you could like pretty much feel like spoiling the ending if you feel like it, but
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know where, because at the end they were like, "Ew, it's in a like a jewelry box or something," that, or what was it, something like that,
Like a
where
hat box or something.
yeah, it's like, yeah, he's got it in he's got it in like some sort of display case or something. um
Yeah.
and
Gory.
so yeah, we're never really given the detail of like where all the parts went, but I would assume, like in my mind, I'm thinking like they put the arms in one case and then they put one leg in another case and one leg in another case, and they might have buried the head in the garden. That's my
Yeah.
sadistic prediction of what happened. um
Yeah.
and that
I wouldn't put the body in the garden. That makes no sense to me. Maybe the like the murder weapon, but I don't know why you would bury the actual body so close. Cuz if like if someone came in and like murdered her, like someone not her, like whatever, like if some random person broke and murdered her, I don't think they would bury her in the garden. Like I would,
yeah,
like if I was gonna murder somebody, I wouldn't bury them next to their house, you know? So I always thought it was the murder weapon, but
well
you
I
never know. And I think that whole plot point of like, what's in the garden, what's in the garden, I think that's a whole, not a red herring, but they're trying to make you think that if they go to the garden, it'll solve everything, but it doesn't. And I think that's like a whole nother point that Alfred Hitchcock was like, we're not gonna find anything there. Like that's totally not important in the long run.
yeah, it's definitely a device as like
Yeah.
adding clues, adding elements to the story. um
Yeah.
I think he kept the body in the biggest trunk though that got moved.
Yeah. Right, with the
Again,
rope on it.
yeah, again, it's speculation. I'm sure Hitchcock loves people wondering what body part went where.
No. Doesn't that bother you though? Like I listen to a lot of crime podcasts and I want the details. Like I want every detail. Just because I'm curious, like what he thought was a good idea. So it bothers me that we never know. It's really like the thing I like. If I hate something about this movie, it's what I hate the most because I'm like, I just tell me yes, no. Body in the trunk? Yes, yes, no. Like, did he dump it in the river? Like where? I just want to know.
Christine, I'm not trying to generalize, but it's really funny because it's kind of a running joke around my coworkers, that because we were doing like a thing where it's like, does anyone have good podcasts to talk about? And literally every woman in our building has a different true crime podcast that they
Right.
listen to. And
Hell yeah.
it's kind of like the running joke is like, oh, they're all gonna kill us or some shit.
Yeah. Also, a lot of true crime podcasts are some of the bigger ones are like some in the top 10 are all hosted by women. So I don't know if
Oh,
that's
yeah.
like a correlation to their audience, but yeah, that is interesting. I feel like I don't know why women love like true crime murder stuff, but there's that show like I Killed My Husband. Like that's a whole TV show in itself of women murdering their husbands. So that doesn't surprise me at all. I'm
Yeah,
definitely
I'm
in
not
that group.
surprised.
I'm in the group.
Yeah, and in the morning too, this guy, the neighbor, who we'll call him, it's Thornwald. That's what they later on go to the mailbox and check out like which apartment he would be in, and that's how they get his name. Thornwald is basically like scoping out and looking very suspicious. Like he's looking all over the neighborhood to see if anyone is making a commotion or if anyone heard anything. Yeah, and then he sees him literally like packing away a saw in newspaper and just trying to get rid of that evidence. Still not sure what he killed her with, but you probably like that's definitely what he used to saw her up.
Wasn't it like a handsaw?
Yeah, it was like it was like for like small branch saplings and small branches.
Which you wouldn't need if you live in an apartment or were like a traveling salesman, unless he sells saws. You wouldn't need that.
Yeah, he's sus. He as a salesman though, he probably has plenty of good suitcases. So there is that.
Yeah, and he can get his hand on anything. And doesn't like the whole movie take place over like 2-3 days?
Yeah, it's not much. I think it's 2 or 3 days, because it's definitely less than a week. But and then he actually shows Lisa this, and at first she doesn't really believe him. She thinks like, oh, you're being a peeping Tom, like stop snooping on your neighbors, that kind of shit.
Yeah.
And then but then she's like, oh, that kind of is actually suspicious. And then later on that day is when his first name is Lars Thornwald. So Lars gets the big box out, which is creepy as hell. And then they get some movers to take it away. And, I'm like all that stuff and probably shipping it off or something.
Yeah.
And then at this point, like Jeff is only more and more suspicious. So he camps out, and this time he has one of his camera scopes. He's not actually taking pictures the whole time because they wouldn't really come through, but he can see through it. And that, and like now the excuse that they kind of weave is that like she's out traveling, but that gets pretty much disproven here because Jeff and Lisa, or at least Jeff does, and then he tells Lisa about it later. Jeff sees Lars like looking through her old purse and like pawning her jewelry, and like he's obviously on the phone like asking, how much could I get for this, how much could I get for that, and because he's trying to get rid of the evidence and make some money on the like at the same time.
I think isn't the therapist lady there too talking about it? Because I read like one of the like memorable quotes was Lisa was like, I wouldn't go anywhere without my wedding ring if I had one. And then the physical therapist lady was like, yeah, you'd have to, cut that finger off of my body. And then they both look back over to the apartment and they're like, oh my God, like you must have cut something off. Yeah.
And then like that's like I think that's like clever kind of like Hitchcock way of piecing things together. Like I like that story. I like that part of the story where the kind of proving of the crime develops.
It's convincing someone else that it happened because he like thinks he saw it or thinks it happened, so it's like him convincing. But when does he talk to the detective at his apartment?
I think it's pretty soon after this and it is important. I like that. I'm glad you said convince people, because it is important that like someone believes him, because he can't use his legs. So if he needs someone to do something, it's either Stella or Lisa or the cop.
Yeah.
So he's really reliant on like his team. Lars eventually leaves without any of his stuff. So he's obviously coming back, but he's probably going to check on like, I don't know, some body parts, or actually maybe do his job as a salesman, or I don't know. Also, real quick, Lisa is played by Grace Kelly, who's in a ton of Hitchcock movies and other movies. She was really famous in the 50s and this era. So that's just
I heard she was a really good actor too. Like Hitchcock really liked her, and I think even James Stewart said like she just gets it, like she knows how to act for the camera. So I think she was just like a huge starlet back then. Plus she's gorgeous. Like she's really pretty in this movie.
I think she was in Vertigo as well. Among the other ones.
So that sounds right, I think.
Yeah, and basically the funny thing is about Hitchcock too is like every other movie he does, he tries to get like a blonde that like is like the most like integral female role. That's just kind of his thing. It's like his signature, and maybe it's him trying to recast Grace Kelly when he doesn't have Grace Kelly, or maybe it's just a Hitchcock thing, but
yeah,
it's what he always does. So Doyle shows up. He's this cop. He's not super convinced. He's kind of like, oh, whatever. Female intuition is dumb. And they kind of debate. They kind of have like a debate, the three of them, while they're drinking brandy. And I think it's just a cool thing in the scene when they're holding their brandy and they're like stirring it and oxidizing it.
Pushing it around.
Yeah, it just kind of sets the tone of the movie of the scene, because they're talking about all the different ways that the murder could have happened or wouldn't have happened. And it's just all like literally like stirring the drink. Like it's another clever Hitchcock moment, and he has a ton of those.
Yeah, I think something else that I found really interesting when I was doing research was, and we can talk about it later because I think it's fascinating as far as like the movie goes and why this movie is so popular, and it's been on like a bunch of top 100 lists, and why it's like in like, I don't know what the Hall of Fame of movies is, but it's in like some film institution, whatever it is. But
it would be like American Film Institute is when they literally graduate a movie to the Library of Congress.
That's what it is.
So they put the negative in the Library of Congress, so that it's basically like it's like the public's responsibility to do everything they can to preserve it.
Yeah, and it's really cool, but you know, the whole movie is filmed, like we said, from Jeff's apartment. And it's really like the camera is the eyes of the audience. Like the camera is the audience. It's a lot of like, what's Jeff looking at, and then a reaction shot of what he's looking at. But I was doing research that the whole time it's a lot on, we always stay at the protagonist. It's always on Jeff. Whatever he looks at, we look at. When Lisa and that other lady leave, we don't follow them. You know, we don't really follow their eyesight. We're always following where Jeff's looking. But I was looking at it, and it said when the detective comes in and he's talking to him like face to face, the whole like mood and like even how they're filming it shifts. Like the detective is always like, what's that called? He's always like the dominating force of the screen. Like he's bigger than, because he's in a wheelchair. So he's like standing up and he's like dominating him. And instead of seeing what Jeff is seeing, it changes perspective to like what the detective's seeing. And it was saying that they did that so that it made you question, because we've been with Jeff the whole time. We're like, yeah, of course he's right. We're seeing it. He's seeing it. But when the detective comes in and challenges him and he's like, you're not right. Like, you're just cooked up here. Like, I don't know what you're seeing. We all of a sudden, like the filming of it, they're trying to use it's like a mental game. They're trying to use the audience and be like, oh, let's take the detective side. Like, yeah, the detective is the dominating force here. Like he's got to be correct. He's talking the most sense. So I think that's something that like amazing directors do, is that that audiences will never get unless you've studied film, is like, they literally are changing your perspective, and you're like, oh yeah, this like investigative guy, but it's in the back of your head. You're like, but is he right? Is he correct that, yeah, like he's just seeing stuff, making stuff up. It's not worth pursuing for a detective and stuff. It's just really cool. And I never, again, picked up on it, but when I was reading it, I was like, that makes sense. That just sounds exactly like something Hitchcock would, do.
Yeah. And like you said, they make the arguments against the murder having happened actually kind of convincing, to where you're like, even though it's a movie and that it's going to have an entertaining ending, and it's not just going to be like, oh, she was on vacation.
Yeah.
Like, that, but you're still convinced enough. And that's like really good writing. And it's just, really good directing and everything else to go with it.
Yeah. It's just so smart, and it's stuff. I feel like the smartest directors do stuff that's like not in your face, you wouldn't pick up. But when you reflect and review movies like this, it's the first thing that you think of is like, when did you think that maybe he was wrong? Or like, when did you start to question, because I don't know when he talks to the detective. I don't know how far we are into the movie, but it kind of feels like a false middle where it's like, oh, is he, or maybe it's towards the end, but it's like, it almost feels like not like a fake climax, but it's kind of like, are we like gonna prove him wrong right here and be done?
Yeah, it is a little bit past the middle, because I know like the movie, I think like the movie, like it ends like with like a lot more stuff than it begins. It kind of is mostly beginning, like the first half of the movie is damn near like all the relationship stuff. And then I believe the second act is really what kicks in. Well, maybe it's not the second act. Maybe it's like late first act. Well, I suppose late first act to early second act is like when we see the briefcase scene happening. After the night where they have like brandy or whatever, Lisa was staying the night. So, they're busy doing other stuff. But while they're getting all sexy, the dog dies. Like my first thought was always that like, oh, the dog fell off the balcony or out of the basket. But the neighbor's dog was actually like strangled.
Yeah.
Which is pretty suspicious. And this kind of locks in with Jeff, because earlier that day when he was spying on Lars digging through the garden, he saw like the dog start to like bother him, and he was like, oh, a serial killer would fucking definitely kill a dog. And then
Definitely.
but Lars was just like, yeah, shoo, buddy, you're like, go on. But later on he fucking killed the dog.
Which sounds so, yeah, it definitely was like a strangulation or like or snapped the neck. It sounds so gory, like us talking about the movie being like her arm in this briefcase and yada yada. It sounds so gory, but you never see it, which is another thing I love Hitchcock movies is like it sounds so bad. If you're thinking about like if I was watching my neighbor move a suitcase back and forth and I was like, there's probably an arm in there, I would be like beside myself with terror and like disgust, being like, there's a bloody arm, but you never see it in the film. It's like the murder was like horrific to think about him cutting up his wife and doing all of that to like someone he married. But the way that you're watching it, you're just like, yeah, he did it. Like it's very cut and dry. Like, yeah, it's probably an arm. It's so crazy.
Well, that's definitely like us being like desensitized a little bit, because back in the 50s or whatever, this still was the cutting edge. So this was like
true
borderline, like, like Rob Zombie or something like that, but
yeah,
better than Rob Zombie. But like as far as being like, oh, this will like make you, this will actually like fuck you up or make you scared and shit.
Yeah.
So like he was always like cutting edge in that way, but like with the limitations he had, he couldn't show any of it. So he just had to get really clever with how to write around it and be like, okay, well, how about this guy? He never goes in any of the houses where we're killed. So it's all like, sometimes you get clues, sometimes you don't. You'll never see the whole thing.
Yeah, which I always appreciate, like the workaround. I think that speaks to him more as a director and them writing the script. Like they really had to think about, stuff like that. It wasn't just this and that. And them filming it from Jeff's perspective. I mean, could you imagine the shot list of them writing it out, being like, Jeff looks to the window, then we see Jeff looking at the pianist, and then Jeff looks to his right, and then we see like the shot list must have been crazy because it wasn't, you're not moving, being like, here's the new set, and then we move to the, to the bank, and then we go to the detectives. Like it was literally just all reaction shots. It's probably so hard to keep track of.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely different. And I honestly think that if Hitchcock were directing today, that like every movie he made would be rated R, and he would like take advantage of the liberties. I think it would. And that
You
would be
think?
interesting to see. I think so. Because I mean, at this time, this is almost as like crazy, gory as it gets, and it's all suggestion, right? So
Yeah.
so now, like, I don't think it would be like maybe like Rob Zombie levels of, slasher flicks, but it would definitely be like, I think, sort of like a David Fincher style horror movie where you have gore, but it's still more about the story or something.
Yeah. I think personally, I don't know. I always, because of, I seem to forget when the movies were shot, like back in 1954, when that's when it came out. But like I always, for some reason, I think like Alfred Hitchcock is like a classy guy, where it's like he just didn't want to show any of that stuff because he wanted to trick your mind and talk about like illusion and I'm showing you what's happening, but I need you to make educated guesses. I think he likes to play with people like that. But at the same time, I always forget that there was like that is really all he could show. So maybe
Yeah.
he would go off the deep end and he would be crazy. I mean, maybe. I wouldn't put it past. I think he could go either way. He would either be like, I want to play mind tricks. I don't need to show all that. Or he would be absolutely, bad shit off the deep end with all that stuff.
Some movies like Dial M for Murder would probably get like a PG-13 because
Yeah.
there's like one death in that, and it's not super hardcore. Like you just get stabbed in the back. So that'd probably
Yeah.
be like a PG-13. But I
Yeah.
think Rear Window might get an R. Psycho would get an R.
Well, even like The Birds, that movie's scary like as is, because like I don't know, birds are weird, but that would be crazy if you filmed that today. Like, but if Alfred Hitchcock filmed it today, it would be nuts. I would not go see that movie. I'd be so scared.
Yeah, so Jeff actually writes Thornwald a letter, and Lisa goes and leaves by his door, and she almost gets caught. Like she has to do a bunch of maneuvering, but
Yeah.
this is kind of when her character kind of really starts like kind of really gets even more developed, because she's like this adventurous type, but she can kind of back it up, you know what I mean? And like just as like her mindset as a person or whatever, like he might think like, oh, you're not actually adventurous, you're just in a phase or something. But no,
Yeah.
like she could, like if she sets her mind to something, like she could actually like do something. I think that's like kind of what he sees. And like, because she comes back a few times and does stuff, and digs through the garden with Stella and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
there's specifically one scene when she comes back through Jeff's door where there's a close-up shot on Jeff looking at her, kind of like he's proud, almost like that he's like in love, and he's also proud of her. That to me is that's why I kind of get that idea that like, he's seeing her as like, oh, she can do like this shit, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I shouldn't hold her back.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, she really is a badass when you think about everything she does in the movie. Like she's fearless.
They her and Stella technically, like, I mean, he does a lot of the planning or whatever, but like they do like all the physical work because he can't do shit.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah. For
like,
real.
and they do more than the cop. The cop shows up at the end, but
Mhm.
they have to convince the hell out of him.
Why do they put the note under his door? What was the point of that?
I think it was to get him to leave the building, just to like check in on that place, and they were never going to go to that
Right.
place, and that just
Right.
gives them the opportunity to dig through the garden.
No, because it was like another like goof of the movie or like kind of a plot hole. But at the beginning, they say that Thorwald is on a 6-month lease, but then he finds his number in like the white pages or in the phone book, and he's like, "You wouldn't have. They wouldn't have come up
Oh,
with a phone book. They wouldn't
okay.
have come out with a phone book for his number to be in there." So it's kind of like
See,
a plot
see,
hole. But it's not. I mean, if you have his,
even Hitchcock's
if
not
you have
perfect.
Yeah, I mean, if you have his apartment number, I guess you could figure it out. Like, it wouldn't be impossible even in the 1950s to figure it out. But he basically makes Thorwald call him, right?
No, I think. Well, I think the first time Jeff calls him, and then
Yeah, because he's like, because there's that thing where he's like, pick up the phone. He's like, you want to. You want to
Yeah.
know, like, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, okay.
So they dig through the garden, but they can't actually find anything. And so we later learned that Lars had moved a body part.
Because he must
Okay.
have killed the dog and moved the body part at the same time, the same night.
Yeah, that's like the big, I'm not gonna call it a plot hole, but like that's like a big plot question that I have.
Like in the timeline of just when.
Yeah, I suppose like I guess it would have just happened when he was asleep or whatever.
Yeah. 'Cause how many times can you cut back to him moving a suitcase? Like only so many
Yeah.
times before it's like, oh, okay.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And then while Thornwald is still away, even after they come back and they say like, hey, nothing was in the garden, they see Miss Lonely Heart with like a bunch of sleeping pills next to her, and it kind of looks like she's gonna like commit suicide.
Yeah.
And then but Lisa decides, okay, I'm gonna still like take this opportunity to go back up and dig through the purse, because if the wedding ring is in the purse or wherever he put the other jewelry, like even if she were traveling, she would never leave her wedding ring. So
Yeah.
that's
Why
what
would you?
that's what she goes for. And she actually gets caught by Thornwald when he comes back in. And that's the scariest part of the whole movie, because like Stewart calls the cops and all he can do is watch. Like he can't do shit. I suppose he could scream, but I mean she's screaming too. Like that one's almost hard to watch. And I think that's where Hitchcock would make it would I don't know, like
Yeah, he would
make
make
it
that
even scarier in modern days. Like I don't know.
that assault would be crazy. But then they yell out. Or what's the physical lady's name? Stella?
Stella, yeah.
She yells out like Miss Lonely Hearts. She yells it out so that she doesn't take the pills. Is that before he comes in?
I think that's around the time.
Okay.
I'm not 100%. But
Yeah.
basically Miss Lonely Hearts doesn't actually kill herself in this movie.
Yeah.
So it doesn't happen there.
Yeah.
But the cops basically save Lisa. Because they come in time, but they kind of played it off differently. Like they didn't tell the cops that, oh, he's trying to assault me or he's killing, or like he's a killer or whatever. They
Yeah.
just made it out to be like she was breaking and entering, and she's like, oh, I'll leave or whatever. And she was just playing him the whole time, and she actually stole the ring, and she kind of shows it to Jeff over the way.
Yeah.
And then that's actually when Thornwald catches eye contact with Jeff, and that's when you know, okay, this is where it's all going to lead to. So
That's the scariest. That is the scariest like shot of the whole movie. When he looks at the ring that she's like flashing and he looks up into the camera for the first time, like dead on to Jeff. That is like one of the scariest shots I've ever seen in a movie. I'm like, oh my God, like we're in trouble. Cause I'm thinking like we're Jeff. So I'm like, we're in trouble. We're in trouble. Like you can't even get out of here. That like sends chills down my spine. That's one of my favorite scenes.
yeah, and also like I'm assuming that none of this is like pre-handicap accessible living spaces. So literally, like even if he were like, okay, Lars is gonna kill me tonight, he can't just order people, like get people to move him and run away with him and get him in a car. Like it would be an ordeal. Okay, and then after the wedding ring proof happens, Jeff calls Tom Doyle, the cop, and then that's actually the first time that Tom is kind of convinced, where he's like, okay, if the wedding ring's there, something suspicious. I got to go check it out. So he's on his way, but right when he hangs up with him, like someone calls him back, and he just assumes that it's Doyle, and he's talking to him like he's talking to Doyle, but there's no answer, and you already know that, okay, it's Thornwald. And that's like a cool like pulling him from under the rug moment right
Yeah.
before Lars comes through the door almost. So yeah, I mean that's this is one of the better endings, I think, to a Hitchcock movie too. Well, he uses like these flash bulbs from his photography days just to like stun him, and then he screams. I kind of think he could have screamed earlier, but I'm glad he didn't.
Yeah, for sure. He could have gotten any of those people's attention.
Yeah.
Yeah, he like stuns him with the like a flash, like multiple, because he comes into his apartment because the girls didn't lock it, or he didn't lock it, and it like tries to come after him, but he stuns him. I think he calls the detective multiple times. He calls the house, and the babysitter picks up, and he's like getting contact with him, tell him to come over right now, because that's when she had the ring. But when he calls him like the one time, he goes, Lisa's in jail. He said, go get Lisa. And then he hangs up, and then that's when Thorwald calls him back. So I think he like called, because he calls him multiple times, because me and my mom watched it again, and I was like, oh, he's talking to the babysitter, because she said him and his wife are out for the night, because I was like, how did the detective get there so fast if he calls him once and then 10 seconds later he calls him again? But the babysitter said that him and his wife were out. So I was like, that makes sense. They might have been close by, like in theory, to make sense with the timeline.
Yeah, I don't exactly remember who they were calling or whatever, but that seems right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, so like the stuns don't do too much, and like it's kind of like temporarily blinds them, but Lars basically wrestles James Stewart over, and then James Stewart, Jeff, it's the first time I called him James Stewart, is dangling from outside the window. When the cops close in, they have Lars, and then Jeff falls from the window. And if you've only watched, if this is like, if you don't watch many old movies, you think it looks kind of cheesy because special effects aren't great. But I watch a ton of old movies, so I'm like, yeah, that's about the technology they had. And then so it's what they could do.
I hate the way he falls out of that window. It takes me out of the movie, but I get it. Like I get the technology thing, but like I'm like, oh, they did so good making this movie, and then it's like the worst CGI of him falling, especially from like a bird's eye view of it. I'm like, oh, I just wish it was like 10 years later, like a little better of a fall. But I get it.
And when he falls out of the balcony or off of the window, this is the first time in the movie that we're not in the apartment as a camera. He seems okay. He looks like he broke his other leg. The cops are already like, hey, he's about to confess to everything. He's losing it up here. And then Stella whispers something to Doyle, and then Doyle asks about the garden, and then it goes into what we were talking about earlier, where like he had buried some part of his wife in the garden. But
I didn't know that she whispered to him. I missed that.
Yeah, she whispered like, ask about the garden or something like that.
Very blunt. Ask him about the garden.
And but yeah, he said that there was there was a body part in there, and the dog was getting too nosy, so that's why he killed the dog.
Yeah.
And then, not serious, Doyle asks, do you want to come with us and look for the other body parts? And she's like, oh, I want no part of it. And then that's the 2021 levels of pun in a 1954 movie, just at its peak, and then it dissolves to the next scene.
Yeah. She's my favorite character. I love her. She's like she's such like a spitfire, the physical therapist. She's my favorite.
Because she's just a super fun character, because like he's totally at her mercy, basically. Like it's almost like a mother like child thing, where it's like, hey, I won't feed you or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, she could damn near be like that if she wanted to, but she's
Yeah.
basically.
She doesn't have to go over there. She doesn't have to go over there and dig up the garden. Like she could just be like, and I'm going home now. Like, but it's fun that she like gets into it and plays along because she's like, well, we got to figure this out. Like she immediately is on board, it seems like, way faster than the detective or Lisa to be like, like, yeah, what is going on over there? She's nosy a little bit.
And then like the neighborhood is kind of back to normal the next morning. And every neighbor has their own end game to their story arc too. And this is when it shows it, because there's a balance to everybody. Like Miss Torso.
Yeah.
Like her husband comes back from war. So, and she was like a ballerina or whatever. We had seen specifically that she was a ballerina earlier. She was dancing like in her ballerina gear. And he shows up, so that's like a sweet scene. And then the young couple that seemed like that they had it all going on were having their first fight, so that's funny.
Yeah.
And then Miss Lonely Heart, was she on a date?
Is it at the end where she's setting like 2 placemats for dinner, or is that the night that she wants to kill herself because he doesn't show up?
I'm talking about the morning after the climax. So
I don't remember them cutting to her. I don't remember what she's doing.
Yeah. Well, Miss Lonely Heart hasn't killed herself, and so that's a win.
That's a good enough resolution, I guess, right there. I don't even know if he cuts. I'm sure he cuts back to her, but it's not anything major.
Well, I guess a few weeks had passed because he has his second cast on.
Oh right.
So probably a week has passed. Maybe she's on a date. I'm not remembering though.
We're gonna have to look. But I'm curious to see like what happened to her.
Well, and then the people who lost their dog have a new dog, and they're still using the balcony and training it in on the pulley system. So everyone really has a positive ending. And I think even like the musician gets a role or something that you can kind of see, like he's like accepted a role or something, and he's playing like music really loud. But really all the neighbors have a happy ending except for Lars and except for the young couple who have, a minor marriage fight at the end.
Yeah. It would have been like funny or just like another like, not to reference to a part 2, but to like throw it out there if they would have shown like new people moving into the apartment and like maybe something like weird happened and then it just like cuts to the end. That's not Hitchcock's style, but that would have been funny to see like who moved in next,
Yeah, or like kind of have that like conversation, because I think that might be a law. Maybe it's just state to state, but like a lot of people have to tell you, like a lot of places have to tell you if someone died in your apartment or house.
Yeah,
just because
like a murder
so many people believe in ghosts and stuff. Yeah, like and get too creeped out about it. But
I would want to be told if someone murdered in my house.
Murder, sure, but I mean, someone's gonna die in almost every house, just natural causes. If anything else,
True. Unless anything funny happens, I want to know.
If anything funny.
I'm really into like set design. I think it's very interesting. So it was some stuff that I had looked up was that IMDb at least said that the budget for this movie was $1 million, but it made like so much money, like the box office or whatever, that it was like, it seemed like such a small budget for how well it did. So I just thought that was interesting. And the fact that they built that whole set like at Paramount, because it looks so real. I love how real the set looks. And I mean, it is real because they built it, but it seems like they literally are filming on like in wherever that is. It doesn't seem like it's on a set at all. Like they really built that own world. So I like that part of it. It said, so whatever story this is originally based off of, because it's based off of not a book, a short story, whatever. It said that in the original story, there wasn't any neighbors. Like all these side stuff that was all added when they like adapted it to the movies, or like Hitchcock added it or whoever wrote it.
Well, that's why. Okay, so they did some basically remakes. So there was one direct remake that was with Christopher Reeves, who's paralyzed, and I think that was a made-for-TV movie, or it did poorly enough that it has only ever lived on TV.
Yeah.
So yeah, Christopher Reeves, if you don't know, if someone listening doesn't know, played Superman, paralyzed from the neck down from riding a horse. He died like in the early 2000s, and he was actually in college. He was actually Robin Williams' roommate, like
really?
all through college. And when Christopher Reeves was like paralyzed, Robin Williams would literally like be there all the time and like keep his spirits up and shit.
He's one of those celebrities that, like, when people always ask, like, dead or alive, who would you have dinner with? Robin Williams is on that list for me. I just think, like, he's a genius, one, but two, I would really like to ask him, like, why, like, how hard it was to be a comedian, and how, and everything that he did, and everything that people wanted him to always perform and do whatever. I just think his life and his downfall was really interesting to me. And I would definitely have like a conversation with him because I loved him. But there's also a remake. You ever seen Disturbia, which is like a direct ripoff?
That's the one I was getting around to. And I don't think there's many other neighbors. I think they just have like the neighbor that's like hot that he like fawns over. And then I think there's the killer, but it's in a suburb, so you can only look at a couple.
There's the kids. Aren't there like kids watching porn or something? And he calls because they like put dog poop on his lawn, and he calls the cops on them.
That sounds like something that would
there's some kids thing. Yeah, there's some kids element too, because the kids are trying to get him like in trouble with his ankle monitor, and he keeps stepping out of the grass to go after them. That's why he puts up like the barrier. Yeah, Disturbia, I liked that movie, and I liked that they tried to remake Rear Window into like a more modern day. I really wish they wouldn't have done the suburban aspect to it. I wish they would have kept it like a city backdrop apartment, everyone's close together sort of thing. But that movie is decent to me. I that's a pretty decent horror movie for me. I like, as far as like scary movies, I like things that could happen. Like this movie, you know, I love like someone got murdered next door, like the babysitter like got killed and they took the kids. I like those movies because those are the ones that really scare me. So if I'm in the mood to get scared, I want like realistic horror.
Yeah, so I see what you mean. Like if you can actually see it happen to you, or
which is
like in your nightmares or whatever.
Yeah, which is not good for my nightmares. So I like to watch scary movies like with the lights on, but I mean, those are the a true scary one to me is like the realistic stuff. I think if anybody likes this movie or wants to watch this movie, I think they should also look up pictures of like, just type in like Rear Window set design, because it's really trippy to see them on like a crane camera, like, you know, from the perspective of Jepsen, to look at the set, like, you know, with like to take a step back and see like the border of the set. And I heard that it's like such a mind trick that Jeff's apartment seems like it's up high, but it's really on like ground level in real life. And they took out the basement of Paramount to make the courtyard, they said. So it's like below.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, which is it's trippy.
Yeah, it's weird that sometimes they do that kind of stuff like in pools. Like I think in Parasite, I don't know if you saw Parasite, but
no, but I'm sure I could guess.
Yeah, but they build like a really small, tightly compacted neighborhood in a big pool, and it's a bonus that they have a pool because like the area has to flood at the end. So yeah, that's just, you know, very clever, you know, using elevation to your advantage, and then you don't have to build super high. Sometimes it's cheaper to build low.
Yeah, it's just trippy to look at, like to take a step back and look at the set, because they did such a good job like creating the world. And then you're like, I think people forget that like this is like a warehouse somewhere, basically. Like that's what it is, you know. People are like, oh, it's so like cool that they filmed them. Like, no, it's like they close the doors at night and like you're on a movie set. Like it's just so trippy. And I think that's the other fact that I saw was the day, so when they're filming like from day to night, the change of, obviously they have to make their own lighting to make it look like day and night. It says that like they got it down to like a science where they could change it from day to night, like all the lights in under 45 minutes, which is probably really good for back in the day. Like it wasn't one switch, it was like them moving rigs back and forth. So I just thought that was cool. I think Alfred Hitchcock is like a genius. Like I said before, Rear Window is my favorite movie of his, only because I think it's the first movie I ever saw of his, and I just got sucked in, and I've seen like his others since then. But it's one that me and my mom always watch together too, so it kind of holds like a special place like in my heart over there.
Yep, for sure. And I would just so like more recommendations. I would recommend like any Hitchcock movie, specifically maybe like Dial M for Murder, which is streaming on Tubi, and I hadn't gotten around to that one until this year. And it's pretty damn good. That's kind of like that's kind of like a whodunit more. It's less gore-ish than even though it's not gore, but you know, it's less creepy than Rear Window.
Yeah, I think if you're gonna go Hitchcock movies, you have to watch Psycho. Like that is his signature. I mean, Strangers on a Train, isn't that one of his too? That's a good movie.
Yeah, I believe so. And then I
don't really know. I don't watch too many like horror or scary. So I don't know if I have any like scary recommendations. I have like, I don't know, there's some good movies on Netflix that I found if you dig a little bit for like some good, not like the popular poppy mainstream stuff, but there's some good stuff on Hulu and Netflix if you like dig for scary movies.
Yeah.
There's so many bad ones though. It's so easy to make a bad scary horror movie. Like it's comical how bad some of them are.
Yeah. And you probably like, if you like Hitchcock movies, you'd probably like David Fincher. He did Seven. He did Gone Girl. He did Zodiac. Movies like that where there's horror elements and you know there's some gore here and there, but it's still way more about the story than it is about like the scares, which is kind of what I look for in a horror movie. But you know, everyone's different. But yeah, I mean that's about all I have. So from a scale of 1 to 5 stars, Christine, I'm gonna give it 5 stars myself. How many stars or would you give Rear Window?
Yeah, I want to do 4.5, only because after doing research, the whole like some of the timeline things are a little off. I mean, he could only do so much, and especially for back then. But yeah, I'm gonna give 4.5. I love Alfred Hitchcock and I love this movie, but yeah, after doing research, I'm like, how would he have his phone number? How would he, you know, he got up the stairs pretty fast on that one. Like, you know, he's so smart. I feel like he could have added something here and there to make it a little more. But I'm mad that we never actually get an answer what was buried where and when the body parts left the building. And that's just me being, you know, like being mad that I don't have concrete details, but 4.5 for sure. Great movie. Right.
I'm gonna give it 5 myself. I probably like Vertigo, Psycho, and North by Northwest more. I think this is probably my next favorite Hitchcock movie, and he has a few 5 stars. He's not my favorite director, but yeah, he's up there for sure.
For sure. It's a movie that I don't expect a lot of people have seen because it is older. Like as I get older, I don't think a lot of people have seen it. But if you have seen Rear Window, I'm always like, okay, this person, we're on the same like wavelength. They kind of get like, they appreciate movies that I like that I do. So if people have seen Rear Window, I'm always impressed.
Yeah, and by the way, I think it might not be on there anymore, but at least for a period in time, I believe Rear Window was also on Tubi. Let the people know where to find you once more, Christine. Just whoever made it all the way through the podcast.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me on. This was fun, and I'm glad I could talk about a movie that I love. You can find me on TikTok and Instagram at Christine's _snaps. If you type it in, you'll find me. And then on YouTube at Christinessnaps. And I really just do like comedy skits, kind of whatever videos. If I'm your vibe, great. If not, totally fine. But yeah, I make social media content and I watch movies. So that's what I do.
Hell yeah. I'll just say, please click the like button and subscribe. Maybe hit the bell. If you're watching on YouTube, check out the Spotify. If you're listening on Spotify, check out the YouTube because they're good for different reasons. On the YouTube version, we do put up graphics and certain things when it calls for it that could be funny and a different experience. But definitely follow us on Spotify, SoundCloud, almost everywhere podcasts are found. Why don't you say goodbye, everybody, Christine? I'm tired of it.
Bye, everybody. Thank you for listening, watching. If you're a movie buff, you should definitely listen to this podcast. I mean, we might be talking spoilers, but you should have watched these movies already. We're just filling you in. So thanks for listening, watching. Keep listening and watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.